Good? Okay. So, pornography. I know in a public speaking class where we're allowed to pick any topic, why would I pick this one? Just the fact that I'm standing up here and I put that word on the board in front of 20 people made some of you uncomfortable, and some of you questioned, dear God, what is she about to say? Okay, but I can assure you this is not a speech where I come up here and I thump a Bible and I give my personal opinion about the insanities that can come with personal things in people's lives. First of all, even though the majority of you know I'm very in tune with my Catholic faith, if I came up here and did that, I'd probably fail, and none of us want that, especially around the time of finals. Rather, I'm going to inform everyone based on scientific data in regards to the fact that pornography can, and in a lot of cases, is addictive. I'm not here to persuade you to do anything in your life. Those decisions are up to you. I'm rather just giving information about the fact that it can be potentially addictive. So first of all, let's define the word addiction. Okay, Webster's Dictionary defines this term as a direct condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. I'm quite certain when most of us think of the word addiction, we think of a lot of people standing around in an AA meeting and saying, hi, I'm an addict. But when you think of those things, you think of drug addicts or you think of alcoholics. You don't think of pornography. And why is that? Because pornography is so mainstream in a sense that it is just something that is done. Sure, that does make sense, but alcohol is also done. Drugs are also done recreationally. When it's taken to a further extent, it becomes a problem, and pornography has the exact same effect. Pornography affects two specific things in a person. One, the brain, like physically, scientifically, and one, someone's mental health, which is still scientifically, but kind of a different set of data. So for all of us that are in a science class this semester, here's a crash course on how the brain works. Deep inside your brain, there's something called a reward center. The job of the reward center is to release pleasure chemicals. Now this isn't just with sexual activities, this is with eating, this is with getting a good grade, this is with getting praise from something. Same chemicals in your brain for all of these different activities. When an addictive substance is used, it gives your brain a false signal. Since the brain can't tell the difference between drugs and a real healthy reward, things become inept in the brain. When porn enters the brain, it triggers, that guy just walked by, I was like, what? When porn enters the brain, it triggers the reward center to start pumping out dopamine, which sets off a cascade of chemicals, including a protein called delta phos B. This protein's regular job is to build new nerve connections and mental connections and pathways in something someone is doing for the pleasure that he or she feels. Those strong new memories outcompute any other connections in the brain, and it makes it much easier to return to any addictive activity, but in this case, pornography. But delta phos B has another job, and that's why its nickname is the molecule switch for addiction. If there is enough delta phos B buildup, a generic switch goes off in the brain, which can last and cause lasting changes to your brain in the way that it is shaped, in the way that you take in data for everything in your life. Every time you do an addictive activity, it releases higher and higher levels, which makes you addicted. So, we'll go back to dopamine. If you are overloaded with dopamine, the brain will try to defend itself by releasing another chemical called crib, which is shortened for its extremely long name, but it's a response element and a binding protein within your brain. Crib is like the brakes on a runway in a reward center. It slows the pleasure response. But once you've had so much of a certain stimuli come into your brain, this tolerance is completely inept, and you will not be able to stop yourself, just as any addictive behavior. So, you have this built on-off switch in your brain. Dopamine cells stop firing after you consume a natural reward in the sense of something like food or, praise from somebody. But when it's something that is extremely addictive and connects to dopamine receptors in your brain, this becomes something that does not work properly anymore. And if it's not working properly anymore, you're going to become addicted. So you may be hearing me ramble about all of this in the back of your mind saying, okay, I've become addicted, anyone becomes addicted, whatever, it's not hurting anybody. But in reality it is. Human beings are selfish people, and at the end of the day, it's hurting you before it hurts anybody else in your life. You're hurting yourself and emotionally connections with your partner in the future. Pornography gives an unrealistic expectation on sex. That's the whole point of it. It's fantasies, and you fantasize, and it's all these amazing things at the click of a fingertip. So if you have something with perfect stage lighting and perfect everything laid out, when you're in the reality of a situation where two people are trying to make things work the way that they're going to work, you're going to have an unrealistic expectation, and you're not going to be able to perform the way that you would, especially if you become addicted to the fantasy. Everybody's all dolled up, and there's unrealistic sets. As with all addictions, you must get more and more of something to get the same high. And if you get accustomed to those things, you are not going to be accustomed to that in your own physical relationships. Dr. Gary Brooks is a psychologist that has worked with porn addicts over the last 30 years. And he says, the more one uses pornography, the more lonely they become in themselves. Anytime a person spends too much time on something unusual, in this sense, pornography, they can't help but become depressed because of the dopamine levels, which in regards to another substance, heroin, attaches to your dopamine receptors, and that's why heroin is one of the hardest addictions to break. And that's why people lose their minds, is because there's so much dopamine being washed out in their brains, they can't function. It takes a lot more time to do it with something like this, but it is completely scientifically possible. Dr. Anna Bridges says, when one partner uses porn at a high frequency, there can be a tendency to withdraw emotionally from a relationship. This again goes back to unrealistic ideas in our brains. That's partially because porn consumption of the brain rewires itself. And it's really hard to rewire your brain afterwards. That's why people that have addictions are in, systems and organizations to help them for years and years and years to come. The brain is one of the most moldable things in our bodies, and if you mold it to something negatively, it's impossible to break. Well, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's very, very, very difficult. Again, so why does any of this matter? Addiction is a serious and life-changing action no matter what the addiction is. Alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, anything. Anything can become addictive. Food can become addictive. But those things are looked at as, we don't want you to become unhealthy, we don't want you to become sick, we don't want you to become sad, we don't want you to be negative in your life. So here's the resources as to what can happen and know your risks. Pornography and sex in general is such a personal thing, nobody wants to talk about it, nobody wants to deal with it. You hush it up and you take it in the back of your mind, just like mental health in general. If people have anxiety, if they have depression, it's only become now that that is a mainstream thing that people actually care about, actually acknowledge. So with things that can connect to us emotionally, shouldn't we have just as much information about the negative effects that can come from it? Pornography is not one of those things, at least in mainstream media. So, in the area of porn, no one wants to talk about it, and that's why I informed you on it today. There are a number of secular and religious-based online resources and people, you can always go talk to a counselor or anything like that, about this issue, so if you are interested, I highly recommend you looking into it more. I was surprised. I was surprised that there was scientific data. I was surprised how many studies had been done, how many doctors took the time to research this, and how it's just not out there. You gotta dig pretty deep, and once you do, it's quite interesting. So yes, at the end of the day, addiction is an extremely hard thing for people to deal with, and it's very, very important that addictions are looked at and acknowledged, and no one wants to look at this as something that could potentially become addictive. So it's better to know what to look for and know that it can become a problem before it becomes a problem.